What's up, fight fans? Shout out to you, Kurt. I was watching Counterpunch Boxing News, one of my go-to platforms where he gives you breaking news. Just a great all-around guy and a great page. Go check out Kurt from Counterpunch Boxing News. He did a video about Luis Ortiz. I believe Ellie Seckback from ES News was interviewing Luis Ortiz about who was his top heavyweight of all time, and he named my guy, Lennox Lewis. Now, Spencer Fearon has a YouTube channel called Stamina for Sale, and he said, according to Kurt, that Luis Ortiz used to spar with Lennox Lewis, and Lennox Lewis's last fight was around 2003 or something like that. I was at that fight, by the way, Lewis versus Klitschko. So how old is Luis Ortiz, unless he was like a teenager or early 20s back then? But he said Lennox Lewis, I guess he liked his size and how he was, agile. He had speed, power, smarts, just a very difficult guy to beat. And I was very impressed by that. And Kurt even said he thinks Lewis would have knocked out probably Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury too, I think. But he probably would have had the most trouble with Tyson Fury because of his height and his weight. Even though Lennox was a big guy, around 250-ish, I think his highest weight was at the last Klitschko fight in the 250s. But I was very impressed by Luis Ortiz saying that about Lennox Lewis, which shows he knows the fight game. To me, that's the best heavyweight of all time. He never got his due credit at the time. People were acting like he was overhyped and overrated, and but they forget Lewis Tyson at the time was the biggest fight of all time at the time. So if Lewis was overrated, why did that fight blow up? It wasn't just because Tyson was involved, because Tyson had other fights that didn't do that well, at least not compared to this, but it was because Lewis's name was involved. It kind of goes back to the whole Anthony Joshua thing. Lewis was a tall, handsome multimillionaire, so when you're like that, people are going to hate on you naturally. So he's getting his credit now, though. You go back and watch his fights, you see how dominant Lennox Lewis was. I mean, very, very high ring IQ. He had power, speed, knew how to jab, beat every man he ever faced, lost twice, avenged both of those wins. I was at his rematch with Oliver McCall at the Hilton in Vegas. You know how that went. That was an interesting night in the ring. Got to meet Lewis at the after party. Frank Maloney's mother met Jim Lampley, took pictures with Lennox Lewis and Jim Lampley. Met I forget his name, but an Irish fighter that was on the undercard. Gary something, great guy. Just an all around great night. But I was at that fight. I was at Lewis's comeback fight after he lost to McCall and fought Lionel Butler. I was at the Arco Arena in Sacramento. I drove all the way up from San Diego and all the way back with no sleep. I don't recommend that. But anyway, shout out to Luis Ortiz for giving props to Lennox Lewis, the pugilist specialist. And hopefully me and Andrew Tucker, shout out to Andrew Tucker, hopefully we can get an interview with Lennox Lewis. We've had on James Ali Bashir, who I met at the Lewis Klitschko fight, just came up to me and started talking, and we touched base recently. We've had him on our show a couple times, real class act. James said he met Lewis somewhere recently, and Lennox Lewis introduced James, I believe, to his wife, as he introduced James as his trainer, so that made James feel really special. Of course, James was Emmanuel Stewart's right-hand man in the Kronk gym, so he knows Lewis well, and I think he used to run some of the sparring sessions. But anyway, if you haven't seen it, go check out Counterpunch Boxing News, where Kurt DeVille talks about Luis Ortiz and Lennox Lewis. You can even check out, I guess, the whole interview Luis Ortiz did with ES News on YouTube. Anyway, this is the J. Roos Theory. LSR forever, the reason I do this. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and be fearless, y'all. Yay, yay.